This is the fifth video in the series on the implementation of the new liability management framework. The focus of the presentation is to introduce the new closure opt-in program, referred to as opt-in, that is under development at the AER. This presentation will provide more context around the opt-in program, as well as the relationship between the opt-in program and the Government of Alberta's Site Rehabilitation Program. There will be an explanation of how this program relates to other closure activities, as well as show the similarities and differences between SRP and opt-in. The presentation highlights some of the work that the AER will be doing to further develop and implement the opt-in program, and end with the next steps. The opt-in program provides an opportunity to request closure work on specific sites that meet the required criteria, which will be outlined later in this presentation. The opt-in program is still in development, including the details on how the program will be implemented. The AER will continue to share as we develop the program, and there will be opportunities to provide feedback with future communications and engagement. A reminder of the GOA policy announced in July of 2020, which includes the 5 components shown. The opt-in program is part of the inventory reduction program. To set some context for what is meant by closure, companies are legally obligated to return the disturbed land, for example, a well, facility, or related site, to a state functionally equivalent to what it was before development. The licensee remains responsible in perpetuity for any infrastructure left beneath the surface. The general life cycle of a site consists of initiation, which includes the approval or authorization process. The site is then constructed and operated. The stages to close a project begin when the resource has been removed or when removing the resource is no longer economical. Closure includes the permanent end of operations, removing surface equipment, properly abandoning the site, remediation of the site, meaning removal of contamination, and reclaiming the site, which is the return of the land to its state functionally equivalent to what it was before the development took place. The time it takes to go through all stages of closure can vary. It can take years or even decades, depending on how the land functioned before it was disturbed. When reclamation is complete, the company can apply to the AER to receive a reclamation certificate that certifies that the land has been reclaimed and that all of the regulatory reclamation requirements have been met. Every company must attain a reclamation certificate to close its projects and end its surface leases. The AER does acknowledge that this is a simplistic representation of the closure process. There are sites closed prior to current legislation, such as the reclamation exempt, or legacy sites that have additional closure process considerations. The process for completing closure work and the criteria used to assess closure, such as the abandonment or reclamation requirements, is not changing at this time. What is changing is the opportunity to provide input into closure work and the factors affecting the prioritization of this work. That is where the closure opt-in program comes in. It's a mechanism to nominate sites for consideration in prioritization of closure work. The closure opt-in program runs concurrently with other closure programs. Licensees initiate closure work as a business decision to reduce their liability when the sites are no longer needed. Historically, there has not been enough of this work being done. With the introduction of the Inventory Reduction Program for 2022, the AER created and set a minimum closure requirement for industry, the mandatory closure spend target, and an optional value-added voluntary target that consists of incentives to enable more efficient closure work. Area-based closure projects are applicable to both mandatory and voluntary targets, as its focus will be on the collaboration between licensees and service providers, with participants sharing resources, technology, and information, as well as improving the efficiency of closure work, driving down the unit cost. In addition to the benefits of closure spend targets and an area-based closure approach, opt-in provides the opportunity for nominations of other sites that may not already have closure work planned. The AER may also direct closure work through orders for example, abandonment, closure, or remediation orders, which may be issued if a company is incapable or unwilling to meet AER requirements and or to provide proper care and custody of its energy infrastructure. Some sites are also directed by the AER to the Alberta Orphan Well Association to complete closure work. The OWA is an independent, nonprofit organization that is funded by industry and operates under the delegated legal authority of the AER. Their job is to close wells, facilities, and pipelines that do not have a solvent and a responsible owner. Although there are some similarities between SRP and the opt-in program, as they are both intended to move sites towards closure, and they both provide an opportunity to nominate sites. However, there are differences in the programs as well. First, nominating a site for closure under SRP does not guarantee that the work will be completed or that a grant will necessarily be awarded. SRP is also a Government of Alberta program intended to get the Alberta labor force back to work. Similarly, a nomination for site closure through the closure opt-in program will not necessarily mean that a licensee will be required to close the site immediately. It is a way to identify sites as a priority for closure work by someone other than the licensee or the AER. It is a long-term program that will be integrated into the liability management framework and will become a factor for the prioritization of closure work and the reduction of inactive inventory. Second, funding for the SRP program came from the federal government's COVID-19 Economic Response Plan that is distributed by the Government of Alberta. The SRP program has a definitive end date. There is no additional funding mechanism for the opt-in program, and closure activities are funded through licensees or responsible parties. Third, reporting is another component of both SRP and opt-in. For SRP updates, you can refer to the SRP site nomination page on the Government of Alberta SRP website. This site nomination page includes a link to the listing of nominated sites and an interactive map showing the location of the sites. Reporting format and frequency for the opt-in program is yet to be determined. It is likely to align with the performance reporting for the rest of the liability management framework, which is continuing to be refined. The closure opt-in program consists of 4 components: site nomination, validating the nominations, licensees actioning or responding to the request, and finally, monitoring the licensee for compliance. Many of the supporting processes and tools continue to be under development. What we know is that the process starts with the nomination or request for closure of a specific site. There are criteria that must be met by both the requester and the site nominated. These are required to be validated by the AER before it's accepted into the opt-in program. These criteria are defined by the oil and gas conservation rules. Licensees, the companies responsible for the sites, are then expected to action the request or respond to the request. As closure work is being completed, the AER will need to monitor for licensee compliance with AER requirements. To successfully design and implement the opt-in program, the AER needs to address several items for each of the 4 components that were outlined in the previous slide. First, the AER needs to identify and build technology solutions to support submission intake, as well as operational and external interfaces. For example, creating a tool for requests to be submitted into the AER, a database to manage the data, and an interface for licensee response. Second, the AER will need to consider timelines for addressing requests. That is, how long will licensees have to respond to nominations and/or action the closure plan, including movement and reporting on various stages of closure work. Third, both internal and external processes will need to be developed to support the program. For example, a process for validating and responding to requests, as well as decision factors and processes for integrating opt-in with other liability management programs. And lastly, educational materials and support for requestors and licensees will also need to be developed and published. This may include regulatory requirements, how-to guides, or training material, as well as a mechanism to support requestors and licensees. The next couple of slides provide more details on the criteria that will be used to validate requestors and sites. Both criteria are set out by the oil and gas conservation rules. The X's on both this slide and the next slide means that there is no direct comparable criteria. First, we will look at site eligibility. Under SRP, a well, facility, or pipeline must be associated with an Alberta oil and gas licensee. SRP grants are only awarded when there's a legitimate signed contract in place between the site licensee and an oilfield service contractor doing the work. For the opt-in program, it is similar in that it must be on an AER licensed site. However, the well or facility must be inactive or abandoned for greater than 5 years. The site must not be classified as a legacy site or as reclamation exempt, as these sites will be addressed through a separate program. Pipelines are eligible under SRP, but not under the opt-in program at this time. Pipeline liability is a topic that the AER requires further policy direction on from the Government of Alberta. Not all sites eligible for SRP meet AER opt-in site criteria. Eligible requestors under the SRP are different from AER's opt-in program. Under the opt-in program, eligible requestors include landowners, band council on a reserve, residents of a Métis settlement, ministers, or disposition holders, and municipalities. Some key differences between the AER's opt-in criteria for an eligible requestor and the SRP criteria is that the SRP does not include municipalities, ministers, or disposition holders on public lands. Another difference is that under the SRP, the contractor who has signed the agreement with the licensee for closure work can apply for grant funding under SRP, whereas contractors are not identified as eligible requestors for opt-in. The AER's opt-in program and the nomination component of SRP will not run at the same time. After March 31st, 2022, SRP site nominations will no longer be accepted by the Government of Alberta. Sites that were nominated under SRP will be assessed, and those that meet the AER opt-in eligibility requirements will be transitioned to the AER. There will be communication with the applicants under the SRP with respect to inclusion or exclusion of the nominated sites in the AER closure opt-in program. The opt-in program should be ready for the new site requests after September 30th, 2022. This is the AER's targeted date for implementation, but is dependent on factors such as system development and definition of requirements. The target date may need to be adjusted as we get into more details. Sometime in between the two milestones, it will be necessary to develop processes, obtain feedback, and provide the necessary training to support new submissions. Virtual sessions were held on this topic and focused on those participants who were already engaged with SRP. Although the AER does not know when or what engagement will look like for opt-in, more information will be available through the spring of 2022. For more information on the SRP, visit the Government of Alberta's Site Rehabilitation Program. For more information on the AER's liability management programs, visit aer.ca. Thank you for your interest in the liability management framework and associated programs. Please check back frequently to the AER website for new developments.